All right, hello. Welcome everybody to the 2020 Austin Percussion Festival, our virtual edition. I'm so glad to have three excellent panelists with me here today. We're going to be talking a little bit about finding your own musical voice, how we can take percussion or take our own musical instrument and start exploring new uncharted territory, figure out what makes us unique, what we truly love to do, everything great like that. So, starting with in the upper left, I'd like to welcome Brian Calhoon. Hello. He's joining us from Provincetown, Massachusetts. His project, Marimba Cabaret, brings mallet instruments center stage in the world of Broadway musicals. His diverse career has seen him as a fellow at the Bang on a Can Institute, a member of the Blue Devils Drum and Bugle Corps. He served as executive director of the Boston Percussion Group, and right now he is a Marimba One discovery artist. On top of all of this, right now he actually runs an inn with his husband in Provincetown. Everybody, please welcome Brian. Thanks for coming.
Buddy.
Our next guest is joining us from Toronto, Ontario. Specializing in contemporary and theatrical percussion, her critically acclaimed project, The Yellow Wallpaper, features text by Charlotte Perkins Gilman and music by Matthew Curley. She holds degrees from McGill University, the Eastman School of Music, and she recently completed the Rebanks Family Fellowship at the Glenn Gould School. She recently performed at the Transplanted Roots Percussion Research Symposium in Guadalajara, Mexico, and has worked closely with countless composers, including Roger Reynolds, Miguel Globacar, Steve Rice, Joe Kondo, so many more. Everybody, please welcome Nikki Joshi.
Hey, Nikki.
Hey, Nikki, thank you for joining us. And last but not least, our third panelist is calling in from Portland, Oregon. His current project, Galaxy, sees him blending mallet playing with the worlds of hip-hop and electronic music. He is an original touring member of the massive percussion group Ghost Note and is a published composer of ensemble music and method books. He studied percussion at the University of North Texas and actively tours the U.S., giving educational workshops and performances to students of all levels. Please welcome Nick Werth. Thanks for joining us, Nick. Well, I am so glad to see all three of you. Really, especially nowadays when it's so hard to get together with folks, it's great to sit down and have a chat about percussion and doing your own thing. So I kind of just want to give each of you to introduce yourself and what you do. And we'll have a little clip of each of you from one of your recent performances. Brian, can we start with you? Tell us about the clip that we're going to see.
Sure. So I kind of discovered throughout my percussion and music training that I love music. I love classical music. I love all sorts of music, but I also love Broadway. I'm a big musical theater fan and love singing. And it finally clicked that I was willing to sing and play. I accompany myself on the marimba. This is sort of my musical coming out story in a way, where I've taken music written for, musical theater and adapted it, as so many percussionists have to do, adapt it to our instruments. So we're going to have a little video of me and Greg Jukes, who's a fantastic percussionist and my duo partner. He's playing vibraphone and playing marimba, and we're covering a musical theater piece from the Pulitzer Prize winning musical Next to Normal, which won several Tonys and has credits from Tom Kitt and Tom York. No, I just suddenly forgot which. Kitt and York are the last names. I forgot their first names, but they wrote the music and lyrics to it. Next to Normal. This is Everything Else.
But his music's not crazy, it's balanced, it's nimble, it's crystalline clear. There's harmony, logic, you listen to these. You don't hear his doubts or his debts or disease. You scan through the score and put mallets on keys and you play. And everything else goes away. Everything else goes away. And you play till it's perfect. You play till you ache. You play till the strings or your fingernails break. So you'll rock that audition and get into Yale. So you won't feel so sick and you won't look so pale. Cause you've got your full ride and your early admit. You're done with this school and all of this. You graduate early, you're gone as of May. And there's nothing your paranoid parents can say. And you know that it's just a sonata away. And you play, and you play, and everything else goes away. Everything else goes away. Everything else goes away.
And next up, Nikki, can you tell us a little bit about the clip that we'll be watching?
Yeah, so this is a clip from a project I commissioned in 2019 from a friend of mine named Matt Curley, who teaches at the Eastman School of Music. And this is a piece that's based on Charlotte Perkins Gilman's 1892 short story, The Yellow Wallpaper. It's one of the first feminist short stories ever written. It takes place in the Victorian era. And it's basically the story of a woman suffering from postpartum psychosis, and basically just how women's mental health wasn't taken very seriously back then. And so in this clip, you'll see that writing was really this character's respite and how she got her emotions out during this time of really just kind of being stuck in a room and not having her emotions met. And so it was a really powerful piece to work on with Matt and develop. And to put the text to a percussion setting using found objects from candlesticks to knitting needles and pen and paper even. So it kind of covers its own little play setting in a way, but with percussion.
We have been here 2 weeks, and I haven't felt like writing since that first day. John does not know how much I suffer. He knows there is no reason, and that satisfies him. It is fortunate Mary is so good with the baby. Such a dear baby. And yet, I cannot be with him. It makes me so nervous. I suppose John never was nervous in his life. He laughs at me so about this wallpaper. That horrid paper. There's a recurrent spot where the pattern lolls like a broken neck. And 2 bulbous eyes stare at you upside down. I get positively angry with the impertinence of it and the everlastingness. Up and down and sideways they crawl, and those absurd unblinking eyes are everywhere. There's one place where 2 breaths don't match. The eyes go all up and down the line, one higher than the other. The floor is scratched, gouged, splintered. The plaster dug out, and this great heavy bed looks as if it had been through the wars. But I don't mind it a bit. Only the paper.
And finally, Nick, can you talk a little bit about the clip of yours that we'll be watching?
Sure. So what we're going to be checking out is it's going to be a live take of one of my Galaxy productions. Most of the time I refer to these as tracks or beats per se, because really what it is, it's more of an instrumental soundscape, if you will. And then I'm live triggering these samples on a MIDI mallet percussion instrument, the Pearl Mallet Station. So this will just be a little clip of a live take of that.
So I kind of just want to start this conversation. I'm just curious how each of you started to discover that you were interested in your current projects, because they're all so unique, but they all feel so like personal. Like I kind of can't imagine you doing anything else. It's really amazing. So I was hoping to talk a little bit about how you discovered what what initially drew you to what you do now. Can we start maybe with Nikki?
Yeah, for sure. So I think my interest in theater percussion, I guess I'll just say there's kind of a history in composition of writing pieces for percussion that incorporate theatrical elements, from including vocalizations to moving around the stage in theatrical ways. I think percussion itself lends itself well to the dramatic. And so I guess for me, the interest really started in my undergrad. I think I was kind of struggling to find my artistic voice when I really was starting my undergrad. And it wasn't really until my teacher assigned me this kind of wild piece called Songs 1 through 9 by a composer named Stuart Saunders Smith. Yeah, and it's kind of this piece where you're speaking in gibberish, screaming at a frying pan with knives. It's really a piece to draw you out of your shell if that's something you're struggling with. And I just remember as soon as I got this piece, I had never felt, I guess, permission to have so much fun before with percussion and performing. I just remember just really enjoying experimenting so much for the first time with how to use your voice and combine it with the instruments, and instruments that aren't very common either. And so that's kind of where my passion started. And then I ended up going to school in Montreal studying with Ayun Huang, who's one of the leading experts in theatrical percussion. And yeah, that eventually took me on a lot of adventures, learning some pretty fun pieces, and eventually deciding to commission my own piece with Matt Curley. And yeah, I guess I noticed that a lot of the pieces in the theatrical percussion repertoire really focused on how the voice could elevate the instruments you're performing. And so I was really interested in perhaps developing a piece where the instruments elevate a text. So for that, I chose Charlotte Perkins Gilman's short story, which I think, yeah, worked really lovely. Yeah.
That's wonderful. So Brian, I mean, you kind of have a similar, in a way, similar history of combining voice and percussion, but in a really different way. So how did it kind of start to happen for you? When did it start to click that this is it, I'm gonna be the singing marimba player?
Yeah, so similarly, I mean, I'd kind of learned to come out of my shell a little bit, and I feel like that might be a running theme for us, but also for all young musicians who are discovering their path and their craft. I found, I obviously went to school. I love percussion and it's what I dug into, but I love singing and combining them. I thought for a long time I shouldn't, or I felt some kind of taboo, like that wasn't okay, or you should only do that like once everyone else has gone home. I mean, I have this silly story where I got in trouble for staying out in the practice rooms past midnight, which was when the building closed and security guards came by, because I would wait until all the other percussionists had left before I'd be comfortable practicing my singing and playing. I didn't want them to know I was singing and playing. And that's sort of funny in retrospect, because like, that's what I was worried about. Like, come on. But there is a certain, I mean, I'm sure we'll dig more into the kind of expectations and rigidity around academia fitting into certain boxes, and you work on your excerpts and your etudes and your concertos, and that's it. Anything else that doesn't fit in those categories must be a midnight or later activity. Like, we all have those. But to answer your question, discovering that I had this unique thing was kind of like this repetitive, like I kept coming back to it. And so finally, I guess it was in grad school in Boston when I really started sharing this with my studio mates, what I love to do, combining, musical theater with percussion. And people were like, oh, that's cool. And I was like, really? Like, are you sure? I still kind of doubted myself for a while, but honestly, I have to give credit to Greg Jukes for daring me and giving me, Nikki, I love what you said, giving permission to have fun with this. We've worked so hard to be serious musicians. Sometimes we need permission to like relax and just enjoy it. And he gave me permission. Like, yeah, you love Broadway, you love marimba, you love singing and playing, go do it. And so it was just a matter of letting me run wild and taking all these, you know, disparate songs and characters and pieces. You know, I don't create a theatrical work. I don't do an entire musical, but I just put on a cabaret, which is essentially songs and stories. We're all just telling stories and we're singing songs or playing songs. And for me, it's singing and playing. And it really felt, like you said, Chris, it felt like this is so natural to me, but I was never taught how to do this in a school. We all have to kind of discover what feels so natural to us that we couldn't imagine doing anything else.
I love that story about kind of being sneaky with what you really want to do. So you mentioned earlier that, you know, kind of just stemmed from almost a lifelong love of Broadway and of musicals. And Nick, in our conversations in the past, you've mentioned, similar to you, your current project kind of stemmed from a love of hip hop and DJ sets and things like that. Can you talk a little bit about what triggered you initially to say, okay, how can I take this thing that I love and combine it with my percussion training?
Sure, absolutely. And really, I feel like I can relate to everybody, you know, thus far, as far as the process and kind of, you know, feeling a certain type of joy, a certain type of passion, in a sense of not in anybody else's parameters but our own, you know, and getting to that point, you know, it's not necessarily how our time is spent in school, but anyways. So I would say from the very beginning, some of the music that really moved me the most as a child was, I would say, funk, soul, and hip hop. I was born in '81 in the Chicago area, Northwest Indiana, and my parents grew up football fans, the Chicago Bears. They won the Super Bowl in '86. When I was 5 years old, I heard the Chicago Bears do the Super Bowl Shuffle hip hop track. It was, you know, every star football player took a rap verse. We're not here to start no trouble. We're just here to do the Super Bowl Shuffle. And since 5 years old, I've always been hypnotized by, you know, that sort of rhythmic, lyrical delivery, and then the music that comes along with that. So, you know, that being in my bones, I'm classically trained. And so in college, it's really tricky to kind of find your place when you have this passion for a musical genre that really isn't a part of the curriculum, right? And then we're learning these techniques that are intended to be applied in a more classical, contemporary type setting, right? So anyways, going through that process, and then finally, a decade after I get out of school, that's when I finally started to put the pieces together and discover what it was that I was kind of passionate about.
That's great. I love that story. So everyone in a different way kind of talked about, you know, okay, I have this training that I went through in school, you know, for a lot of us starting when we were pretty young, like learning how to hold snare drum sticks, playing on a bell kit, things like that, all the way through college. And you all mentioned, you know, those kind of programs really tend to center around more, I guess you'd say, traditional or conventional aspects of percussion. Things like playing in an orchestra, things like playing marimba solos, stuff like that. So what I'm curious about is, for each of you, did you find you had to kind of seek out some kind of external training or wisdom, or did you have to find some kind of mentor to help you with your current project? Because, you know, for each of you, you're now doing something that really doesn't fall under that umbrella. And I'm wondering, you know, were there any steps along the way that helped you explore these different skills and techniques, or was it really just experimenting? Brian, I think I'd maybe like to start with you, especially with the vocal part of it. You know, did you have to seek out some kind of training, or how did that all get started?
Yeah, it's funny. So many feelings sort of swell up when you ask those questions, because I'm like, God, how did I get to here? And I think all of us have our own paths and stumbles. But I was very lucky that when I was in grad school in Boston, my percussion teacher, Sam Solomon, his wife is a voice teacher. And I was working with him on these Charles Ives songs. I was working on sort of transcribing classical repertoire for the marimba, but singing it. So I actually had these duo lessons where I was taking voice lessons with Christy Herrera Solomon and percussion lessons with Sam, and kind of working on the two disparate, you know, techniques, which could not be more opposite. I mean, you have percussion, which is like an external instrument, and voice, which is like your body. So it's opposite ends of the spectrum, but it was really fascinating how they inform each other. And I could talk about that for hours, but they were really cool because I don't mean to brag, but it seemed like a pretty unusual lesson where I had both of them in the room. And I was singing and playing, and Sam would be like, oh, make sure to do that. And Christy's like, well, make sure your spine is aligned. And well, but that and the note, but your neck was like sort of confusing. But that's exactly that conflict where these two elements start to rub, that the friction, I think, is where you find the energy and the power to take on something new. So, I mean, I guess teachers giving you that permission to explore, that's so powerful. And I hope every student gets that, because otherwise you really have to feel like you're climbing uphill to find what you're passionate about. So I was very lucky that way.
Yeah. And that's interesting how almost the two things that you were trying to do simultaneously were at odds with each other. You know, I'm curious, Nikki, you deal with so many aspects of staging, which in a way is kind of counter to what we talk about in percussion, especially multi-percussion, like efficiency, having everything at arm's reach. So do you have a similar balance, or was your experience different?
Yeah, for sure. Especially in developing this newer piece, I really felt like I was kind of towing a line that was barely there anymore between music and strict theater. And I mean, I don't have any theatrical training or background besides some like Christmas pageants when I was a kid. So it was really, I felt like I definitely wanted to be careful that I wasn't coming across, you know, trying to do something that people spend their lives training to do. And so for me, it was really important to seek out resources to gain that knowledge so that I felt comfortable doing something that really blended the two worlds so together. So I did seek out some theatrical coaches in Toronto when I was working on the project, and took some classes with them, and as well as with Ayun, who really has a great mind for staging as well. She's worked on a lot of large scale works for theatrical percussion and voice. And so, yeah, just really seeking out the resources to learn from the experts in each field, be it from staging or acting specifically. And yeah, just taking the time to just really learn from everybody that you can. I think that's the best way to explore your interests, is really seeking out the people that know it the best.
Can I add, sorry to interrupt, but can I ask, I mean, did you feel like the school or whatever you were doing was set up for that? Or did you kind of have to go out of your way and say, hey, I want theater training, or I want voice training?
Yeah, so I'm just looking back. I feel like when I started becoming interested in this in my undergrad, I definitely felt like I needed to do a bit of self-advocating to convince everybody, like, this is what I want to do, this is what I'm doing, because it was very much one of those conservative, traditional kind of atmospheres where you had to practice your excerpts and stuff. So it wasn't really until I found my mentor for my master's where I was like, oh my gosh, there's people that actually do this, and they're just as passionate about me, about the art form as I am. But I know not everybody's as lucky enough to find mentors that are so on that path as them. And I would just say that I think just the more, once you find something that you really love to do and are passionate about, and if it's a little different from the environment you're in, I think just the more you commit to doing it and putting it out there, no matter for who it is, I think everybody has a community waiting for them. And the more you put yourself out there, the more comfortable other people will be. And so in doing that and just sharing videos or thoughts with people, I found so many other friends with similar interests, which has been great. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. So Nick, I'm curious about, kind of similar to what Nikki was saying, how you sought out that extra knowledge, because for you, it's all about the tech, at least a lot to do with the tech that you're using. And that's definitely not something that we associate with acoustic percussion instruments. So what was that process like for you? Just learning and finding gear and developing, your rig, which is totally built just for you. Like, it's totally personalized at this point.
Yeah. While I was doing the classical percussion, standard classical percussion thing. When I say standard, what I should specify is, as far as the North Texas experience goes, it felt like it was very much geared towards a multifaceted percussionist, in the sense that we had to take 4 semesters of drum set, private studies, 2 semesters of timpani, 4 semesters of snare drum, 4 semesters of marimba, 2 semesters of vibraphone. Do you see what I mean, right? It was so specific, as far as like, this is what you have to do, right? If you want to get the performance degree, right? You have to be like more wide. It was like more of a broad coverage than like deep, right? It was more of like that jack of all trades, as opposed to like, how deep can you go into something, right? And so, for me, I was always really good at following instructions. And so I was going through the educational process and enjoying all the facets, right? So I loved the rhythmic side of percussion. Drums is really what motivated me in the beginning, but then also the melodic side of percussion. I loved playing 4-mallet marimba. I loved playing jazz vibraphone. And so these two worlds for me often felt like polar extremes while I was in school, partly because you had, very specific instruction coming from one percussion instrument, and then you'd have that teacher saying, what do you want to do? Do you want to really commit to this one, right? Or do you really want to commit to this one? And being someone who really loved all of it, I was very indecisive in that, and I didn't really want to choose one route. So that kind of, played into my favor, I guess you could say, in the long run, in the sense that I didn't whittle down my own passion just because I had teachers that were saying, you need to specify, right? You need to choose something more detailed. So in the long run, that helped me. But in the short term, it was a little difficult. It took me, about a decade before I finally came up with this concept of how I could unite and both of sides of percussion that I'm passionate about. So long story short, I was a full-time educator right out of school until I had this sort of epiphany with the Galaxy Project, and I was spending a lot of time teaching in the drumline world, in the drum corps activity. Many years spent and many hours spent doing that and focusing on specifically that. And so on the percussion side of things and the rudimental activity, as you know, we have front ensembles. So that's where the tech for me really kind of came first. I saw these front ensembles at, say, Grand Nationals, BOA, and they're using mallet percussion instruments and just making them sound like marimba, or maybe sometimes they want that violin patch, right? But I was seeing some videos of these groups use these MIDI instruments, and then all of a sudden I just had that angelic choir moment where I thought, this is MIDI. I can put my own sounds into this. I can make it sound like whatever I want.
So a lot of times when we're, kind of venturing out, doing our own thing in percussion or in music in general, we kind of have this initial roadblock of, how am I going to get people to know about what I do? How do I, whether it's marketing myself or how do we even organize a show? And I'm curious for each of you, especially because what you do is maybe harder to explain than just saying, I'm a drum set player, or I play in this rock band, or, I'm going for an orchestra audition. How did you find it was trying to get that going, book your first shows, market yourself? Brian, I kind of want to start with you on this. What was that experience like?
It is so difficult. I mean, marketing or just awareness, because I think I'm going to answer your question, but I may take a little bit of a roundabout way to get there.
Please do.
So I feel like, hearing all of our stories, like Nikki and Nick, and like all of the things that we really love and that we do now that are so unapologetically us, were kind of the things that when in school, we kind of like hid a little bit, or were a little shy or embarrassed even to show. And I think every student, every musician out there has that side of them that thinks, well, my school seems to be prioritizing these types of music or these values, and I have these other values that don't fit into the curriculum grid. And if you feel like you don't fit in, then it must not be valuable. Tear that wall down, because that should not be your definition of value. And that's a whole other TED talk we could have.
Bravo. Yeah.
If you don't fit into a curriculum grid, good for you. You have something to teach the school. That aside. So it's interesting that our paths, and the thing I love about myself was the same thing I hid when I was in school. So if anyone watching this is a little nervous about their interests or some style of music or some weird, unusual combination they want to do, oh, just wait. I bet you that's going to be your prize. That's going to be your pride and joy in time. To answer your question, what has made it challenging? So Marimba Cabaret, for example, it is percussion and theater. It is part concert and musical. I'm too much of a concert for theater companies to hire me to do a show. I'm too theatrical for a concert series to hire me and do a show. I live in this weird world where I don't really fit into either established thing, which if you're looking at just the bottom dollar, like my dad's like, well, how much money did you make? Okay, if that's your definition of success, okay, that's another conversation to have. But it's tough when trying to market a show that doesn't fit into a preconceived, concept. But that can also be to your advantage when you're trying to differentiate. Marketing is all about what's that unique thing that you do that no one else does. That can be really valuable, but it takes time for folks to recognize what is this, familiarize themselves with it, and then to start to want it or seek it out. I haven't quite cracked that code yet, so when I do, I'll let you know. But in the meantime, it's identifying what you do that's so you, that I think, Chris, you had said this something like when you watch someone in their element, it is so captivating. Whether you've seen it before or it's something totally bizarre. I admit I just watched like a clip of Nikki and Nick and your stuff, and I was like, that's so weird. I've never seen anything like that before. But like, I can't take my eyes off it, because that conviction comes from your own identity and your ownership of that craft. So I forgot what the question was, but I hope I
No,
answered it.
it's fine. I love what you said. And what's interesting to me is you're kind of talking about like flipping the switch. What is your detriment becomes your advantage. What is that weird thing that you do sometimes is everything that you do. I'm curious. So for Nikki, you mentioned there was a bit of, I don't want to say a precedent, but a bit of a history of theatrical percussion works existing. But you've now taken it to kind of the extreme, to these really, really high levels. So I'm curious for you, like, what was that process like? And how do you find the whole world of trying to take this aspect that was kind of a portion of percussion and really make it a prominent thing, put it in center stage?
Yeah, for sure. I feel like me and Brian might have similar or related problems where whenever I say I do theater music or music theater, people are like, oh, you do musicals. And I feel like with you, it's still part of that, but so different at the same time. So it's always, when you do something different, you have to kind of develop your own way of speaking about it to get people interested in it. And that's kind of a big challenge, but it can be a fun one as well, because it just means that you have to do even more thinking about what your projects mean to you and how you want to get other people excited about them. Yeah, and I guess in terms of taking my works to where they are now, yeah, I guess a lot of the history for, without getting too detailed, for theatrical percussion is very heavy in white European men doing like Dada, strange, like museum art pieces. And that's a lot of sort of how this type of music originated. And at least when I was starting to think about this project and projects that I wanted to take on, I just thought it was really important to find new ways to get different stories told and work with different people with different backgrounds. And I feel like with theatrical percussion and theatrical music in general and theater, it brings a different level than I think just music has on its own for you to portray stories and different voices. And so that's something that I was really interested in exploring after I had worked on a lot of those more historical pieces. And so I think that's sort of how my voice started developing. Yeah.
That's really wonderful. Nick, I want to shift it over to you. So part of what you do now is kind of host these workshops and more interactive classes with students. You travel around, you put on concerts, and you work with students. And everybody at some point has mentioned that, their educational framework maybe didn't line up with what you were doing now. Brian, you had a really lovely sentiment on that. Like, that's a great thing. So Nick, I'm curious, as someone who kind of does these traveling workshops, if you could change something about the way the educational percussion system is set up, how would you change things to kind of enable things like what you all do now?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's complicated. With often I think with the technical side of what we all, and when I say we all, I say all of us talking today, what we did to be here, right? What we did to gain a technical understanding of percussion, right? At the bottom line, 6th grade, right? Until what, right? So that experience is very, very similar for most percussion students, assuming that they have access to a really great music program, right? And oftentimes that's not the case, right? So that's a whole other issue, right? But I know first and foremost that regardless of what I'm about to say, that nothing that I'm doing now with the Galaxy Project would be possible if it wasn't for this very, traditional path that I went through to learn these things, both technically and musically. However, I think that it is very, very rare for students to experience this type of open-mindedness in a sense of what opportunities are available. Uh, and I think oftentimes what can happen in like a percussion studio environment is the focus is so much on the studio itself that we kind of forget that every individual there has a what if, or has a special vision, or has a a creative feeling that maybe is a little out there, right? You might think I'm crazy, but I think I could play hip hop on a vibraphone, right? It's like, yo, you're crazy, Nick. Calm down. So I think it gets complicated because the studio really wants things to be successful for the studio, right? But then we also want to prepare these students for the real world, right? And there's a lot of money being spent in the process. So I think it has to be said. Anybody who asks me advice these days and says, where should I go study music? Who should I study with? I think the best advice I can give personally is that study with somebody that's willing to hear you out. Study with somebody that is open-minded enough to listen to you, because you're spending a lot of money. And in the middle of your education, if you all of a sudden get these grand ideas, you want people around you that are going to, at the very least, hear you out, and support that, spontaneous creativity that may happen.
Amen.
Yeah, I think that's wonderful. So in a way, it almost is like a balance between, us as, students of percussion, and I use that in the general sense. We're all studying percussion. This balance between us as students of percussion being willing to take a risk and be honest with ourselves, but also, balancing that with being in an atmosphere that's open to that.
Well, I love, Nick, what you just said. I mean, it is all about encouraging students to find their path. And any school or any teacher that comes to you and says, I have all the answers and I have the path laid out for you to take, be suspect of that answer, because it really is about finding your creative outlet, and your path will look so different from anyone else's. Something that I fully admit, having attended a conservatory, not one but two, I hate to say it, but the word conservative is in the name. There is a lot of focus on, like Nikki, you mentioned, I mean, we're obsessed with performing and studying music by dead white men. There's some great music by them, but there's also some great music by non-white men, non-dead people that we should also be celebrating and focusing on. So while I have a little bit of myself feeling like I wish I was in a more open-minded setting, granted, I got support. I mean, my teachers were very open-minded. I don't mean to dismiss all of the work I've had, and I'm so grateful for my teachers, but I feel like the educational models are starting to shift. There's a few cracks in the veneer or whatever, moving away from this kind of, I'll just call it white supremacy, and moving towards like, hey, different styles of music are equally valid. Hip hop is valid, a form of music to study. Why not celebrate all of these art forms and styles of music, not just these orchestral, classical, European platforms? I'm very grateful for the technique I got from that training, but ultimately I'm using that technique for something totally different. So I hope that educational models, and I hope that students are getting more of an open-minded approach to music.
I think that's a really great sentiment. And Nikki, I want to go back to something you said earlier. You mentioned for you almost got a push when a teacher suggested, hey, you should check this out. The Stuart Saunders Smith songs 1 through 9. So I'm curious from your perspective, like how can teachers better facilitate moments like that? Because it sounded like it just took that one moment and it was like lightning. You're like, this is what I've been, this is me. This is the thing I've been looking for. How do you think, mentors or teachers or, even just people kind of leading the way in their own right can help others find those moments?
Yeah, absolutely. I was definitely fortunate in my undergrad to have a teacher that was very involved with his students and sort of attuned to what they were going through during school. But I think a big thing for just these institutions in general is that they need to listen to their students' needs more, instead of so much focusing on the face value that they've been putting forth, and keeping on that track. And I think the more that these schools listen to their students and actually watch the projects that they're taking on and are interested in, the more of open communication can happen to help better support these sort of new concepts that are coming in and new communities that need to be supported, within the conservatory setting. I would just encourage all teachers to definitely just be open to having conversations with students. And there is that sort of mindset in education where you need to be the well-rounded percussionist and play the xylophone and your snare drum rudiments, which is, important for learning the technique. But I think there's always going to be a certain point where you need to touch base with your students to really understand and learn about their interests. And I think that's how teachers can learn more themselves about how the music community is shifting. If that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. That's great. So I could sit here and talk to you 3-4 hours. This is so wonderful, and I love this conversation. But I think we should maybe start wrapping it up. And I kind of just want to ask each of you maybe one last closing thought. Say I'm high school percussionist, I'm sophomore in university, and I'm hearing you all three talk, and I'm like, what, this is great. I want to figure out my thing. I want to figure out what it is that I do. What would be your advice to someone who has that background, who's been playing percussion, maybe it's a grasp on techniques and that fundamental, but is wondering, okay, what do I do to even start figuring this out? Brian, I'll start with you. What would your advice be?
Yeah. One, and I presume a student, any student, you should be a sponge. Just absorb all different styles of music. Go to your friends' concerts or recitals that are not in your studio. Percussionists should go see the viola recital, or, oh my gosh, go to a dance concert. Shocking, I know, but go to something outside of your discipline. First of all, just be a sponge and absorb all the arts that are out there. But then 2, trust your instincts. If there's some passion and part of you that, you feel needs attention, don't feel just because it's not in the syllabus that it's not worth following. Trust your instincts. That will often become your pride and joy in the future.
Yeah. Trust your instincts. I love that. Nikki, how about you? What advice might you give?
Yeah, I definitely agree with what Brian said. And I think, as a student, I think reach out to all the different art forms that you can and go to museums, take classes if you can, with actors and sculptors, whatever you're interested in. For me, I can't speak for everybody, but for me, I know, especially as a student, we take ourselves so seriously, and you have to, if you want to make this, your living and your life form, but it can really lead to a lot of stress in your life. And I think that every student should set aside even one period in your studies, or just when you're out of school, to just decide you're going to do whatever you enjoy, whatever you think is fun, and whatever you can experiment with, and decide, for this period of time, I'm not going to take myself so seriously. I'm just going to really experiment with what interests me. And I think once you come back from that, you'll be happier and also a better artist. Yeah,
I think we're definitely all guilty at some point, taking ourselves a little too seriously. I like that a lot. And Nick, we'll kick it over to you. What advice would you give?
Well, I agree with everything that Brian and Nikki are saying. Uh, and, think about this for a second. Uh, each one of us is very unique, and we cover a wide range of different types of styles and genres using the same uh, percussion instruments, right? And we came down that same percussive path that you're on right now, most likely, right? And so really, you have to understand that even though we were all doing those same steps, we came out on the other end completely unique and individual, right? And in that sense, there's really not a whole lot of competition, in the sense that it's okay to support one another. It's okay to celebrate the successes of one another, right? Because all of our successes, all of our celebrations, it really is interwoven and connected, and it brings us all up as artists. So it's okay to support everyone. Listen to all sorts of music. Follow your heart. If something moves you, right, give that space. Ask some questions there. What's going on over here, right? And even if that vision that you're having is non-existent, isn't tangible, who knows? Who knows, right? Because we all three of us, all four of us, Kraken Quartet, there was no Kraken Quartet before Kraken Quartet, right? And we all had this vision that was not tangible, and now we're creating our reality. And that's a beautiful thing to bring your passion into that.
Yeah. Round of applause for that.
Yes.
I love that. We're all on the same team here, even though we're talking about finding our own unique voice. It really is a collective effort to keep pushing each other and inspiring each other. That's wonderful. Well, thank you again so much for joining me. Those at home, thank you for tuning in. If you'd like to learn more about any of these great artists, please just check the description down below. There'll be links to their pages and more information on them. Nikki, Brian, Nick, thanks so much for talking with me today. I hope to see you all again soon. Stay safe and have a great evening. Bye, everybody.
Thanks, Chris.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.